a cowboy spotted an Apache woman washing by the river, and her torn dress stopped him cold. The sun was already starting to lower in the sky when the cowboy guided his horse along the narrow trail beside the river. The day had been long, and dust covered his boots and the edges of his coat. He had been riding since early morning, searching for a calf that had wandered away from the herd. The land around him was quiet, with only the sound of insects, distant birds, and the steady flow of the river breaking the silence. He was not in a hurry, but he knew night would come soon. Out here, darkness could be dangerous. Wild animals moved more freely, and getting lost was easy if you were not careful. Still, he felt calm in this familiar land. He had grown used to riding alone, trusting his horse and his instincts to guide him through wide-open spaces and hidden paths. As he followed the curve of the river, he noticed how the water reflected the orange and gold colors of the sky. The breeze was light, carrying the fresh smell of water and grass. It felt like a peaceful moment, the kind that made a man slow down and take a deep breath. For a short time, he forgot about the missing calf and simply enjoyed the quiet beauty around him. Then his horse suddenly lifted its head and slowed its pace. The cowboy gently pulled on the reins, feeling that something had caught the animal's attention. He leaned forward slightly, scanning the area near the riverbank. At first, he thought it might be a deer or some small animal coming to drink, but then he saw movement that did not match an animal's shape. Near the water, a woman was kneeling by the river. She was carefully washing clothes, dipping fabric into the water and rubbing it against a smooth rock. Her movements were slow and careful, as if she was trying not to make much noise. The cowboy immediately recognized from her clothing and appearance that she was from the Apache tribe. He froze for a moment. This was not a place where he expected to see someone alone, especially not a woman. The area was far from towns and settlements. It was also a place where tension between different groups could easily turn dangerous. His first thought was to turn his horse around quietly and leave without being seen. He did not want to start trouble, and he did not want to scare her. He gently guided his horse a little to the side, planning to move away. But then he noticed something that made him stop. Her clothing looked worn and damaged. From where he sat, he could see that the fabric was not in good condition. It looked as if it had been torn and patched more than once. She moved in a way that showed tiredness, like someone who had been traveling or struggling for a long time. This was not someone simply enjoying a peaceful moment by the river. The cowboy felt a strange, tight feeling in his chest. He had seen hardship before. Life on the frontier was not easy for anyone. But there was something about the way she worked so quietly and carefully that made him feel that her situation was serious. She was alone. There were no horses nearby, no camp, no signs of other people. He stayed still, watching from a distance, not wanting to alarm her. The woman did not seem to notice him at first. She focused on her task, dipping the cloth, wringing it out, and laying it on a rock to dry. The water flowed around her hands, and her long, dark hair was tied back loosely. The setting sun cast soft light around her, making the scene look calm. But the cowboy could feel that something was not right. He told himself again that it was best to leave. Encounters like this could easily turn into misunderstandings. He knew stories of fear and violence that started from small moments like this. He respected the land and the people who lived on it, but he also knew that trust between strangers was rare out here. Still, his eyes kept going back to the torn condition of her clothing. It was not just worn from age. It looked damaged in a way that suggested rough travel or some kind of trouble. He could not see any injuries from where he was, but her careful movements and tired posture told a story without words. His horse shifted its weight, and let out a soft sound. The woman suddenly stiffened. She slowly turned her head, sensing that she was no longer alone. Her body became alert in an instant. She stood up carefully, facing the direction of the sound. Her eyes met the cowboys from across the short distance between the trail and the riverbank. For a few long seconds, neither of them moved. The air felt heavy. The cowboy slowly raised one hand, not as a greeting, but as a sign that he meant no harm. He stayed seated on his horse, keeping his distance. He did not want to scare her by riding closer. His face was calm, but inside, his heart beat a little faster. He knew how dangerous fear could be. The woman held her ground. Her expression was cautious, not angry, but guarded. She did not run, but she was clearly ready to if she had to. The river continued to flow between them, as if nothing unusual was happening. The cowboy cleared his throat softly, careful not to sound loud or threatening. "I didn't mean to disturb you," he said in a calm, low voice. He did not know if she understood his words, but his tone was gentle. He pointed to the trail behind him, and then made a small motion as if to show that he had been passing through. For a moment, she said nothing. Her eyes studied him, taking in his clothing, his horse, and the way he carried himself. She was clearly trying to decide if he was a danger. The cowboy felt the weight of that moment. He had always thought of himself as a simple man, someone just trying to make a living. But here, to her, he might look like part of a world that had brought pain and loss. That thought made him uncomfortable. He did not want to be another reason for fear in someone else's life. He slowly moved his horse a step back, giving her more space. "I'll go if you want," he said quietly, even though he knew she might not understand every word. He gestured again, trying to show that he could leave. But she did not tell him to go. She did not move closer either. She simply stood there, holding the wet cloth in her hands, as if unsure what choice to make. The cowboy noticed how thin and tired she looked. Not weak, but worn by something deeper than just a long day. Her eyes carried a kind of seriousness that made him think she had seen more trouble than most people should. This was not a random meeting. It felt like one of those moments where two lives crossed for a reason, even if neither of them understood why. The wind moved gently through the grass, and the light of the sun continued to fade. The cowboy thought about the calf he was supposed to be finding. It felt far away now, unimportant compared to the human being standing in front of him. He had a choice. He could leave and pretend he had never seen her, or he could stay a moment longer and try to understand if she needed help. He chose to stay, not because he felt brave, but because something in his heart told him that turning away would haunt him later. He did not move closer, but he did not ride away either. He waited, giving her time, letting her decide how this meeting would continue. The river flowed on, carrying away the last light of day. What had started as a simple ride to find a lost animal had turned into something unexpected. The cowboy did not yet know how important this moment would become. All he knew was that this quiet meeting by the river had already changed the direction of his evening, and maybe, in ways he could not yet see, the direction of his life. The silence between them felt long, even though only a few moments passed. The cowboy remained on his horse, keeping his posture relaxed, while the woman stood near the river with the wet cloth still in her hands. The sound of water moving over stones seemed louder than before, as if the river itself was watching and waiting. The cowboy could see that she was trying to decide what kind of man he was. He did not blame her for being careful. Out here, trust was not something given easily. It had to be earned, sometimes without words. He slowly removed his hat, holding it in front of him as a sign of respect. The small action felt important. He wanted to show that he did not see her as a problem or a threat, but as a person. She watched closely, her eyes following every small movement he made. The torn condition of her clothing became more noticeable now that he was paying closer attention. The fabric was worn thin in places, and some areas looked like they had been repaired in a hurry. It told a quiet story of long days on the move, of having little time or safety to properly care for herself. It was clear that she had not chosen this life of difficulty. The cowboy felt a deep sense of concern. He did not want to stare, so he looked away for a moment, giving her privacy and space. But even without looking directly, he could feel the weight of her situation. A person did not end up alone in a place like this without a reason. He gently guided his horse to a nearby tree and tied the reins loosely, still keeping a good distance from her. He wanted her to see that he was not planning to rush away or rush toward her. His movements were slow and careful, almost as if every step was a question, asking for permission. The woman did not move. She stayed where she was, watching him. The cowboy then took a small water canteen from his saddle. He held it up slightly so she could see what it was. He did not walk toward her with it. Instead, he placed it on a flat rock closer to the river, but still several steps away from both of them. Then he stepped back. It was a simple offer. Water was life out here, and sharing it was a sign of goodwill. He hoped she would understand that he was trying to help, not control the situation. She looked at the canteen but did not pick it up right away. For a long moment she stood still, as if listening to something inside herself. Then, slowly, she took a few careful steps forward. Her movements were quiet and alert, like someone who had learned to always be ready for danger. She reached the rock, picked up the canteen, and held it in both hands. She did not drink right away. She looked at him again, studying his face. The cowboy met her eyes and gave a small, calm nod. After a few seconds, she took a small sip, then another. Only then did she seem to relax just a little. She did not smile, but the tightness in her shoulders eased. That small change told the cowboy a lot. It told him that she was not completely closed off to help. It told him that part of her still believed that not all strangers were dangerous. That gave him a quiet sense of hope. He stayed where he was, letting her take her time. The sun continued to sink, and the light grew softer. Shadows stretched across the riverbank. The air felt cooler now, and the cowboy knew that night would not be far away. That made him worry even more. Being alone after dark in this area could be risky for anyone, especially someone without a horse or clear shelter. He thought about how to communicate that, but words felt limited. He pointed gently toward the sky and then made a small motion with his hand going down, trying to show that night was coming. Then he pointed to the surrounding land, as if to say that this place would not be safe after dark. The woman followed his gestures with her eyes. She seemed to understand his meaning, even if not every detail. Her face grew more serious. She glanced around the area, then back at him. It was clear that she already knew the danger. She had likely been facing danger for days, maybe longer. The cowboy wondered how long she had been alone. He noticed that she carried very little with her. There was no bundle of supplies, no extra clothing, no clear sign of a camp nearby. It made him think that she might have lost more than just time and comfort. She might have lost her connection to her people, at least for now. That thought made his chest feel heavy. He had heard stories of people being separated from their families and tribes. Those stories rarely ended easily. Survival became the main focus. Everything else had to wait. The woman lowered the canteen and spoke a few quiet words in her own language. The cowboy did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was not angry. It was tired. It sounded like someone explaining something painful, even if he could not catch the meaning. He listened carefully, nodding slightly to show that he was paying attention. When she finished, there was a pause. He did not pretend to understand what she said, but he gently placed his hand over his heart for a moment. Then he pointed to her and made a small, respectful bow of his head. It was his way of saying that he heard her and that he cared, even if language stood between them. She watched him closely, clearly surprised by the gesture. For the first time, her expression softened just a little. It was not a smile, but it was something close to relief. The cowboy then pointed down the river, then back toward the trail he had come from. He was trying to show possible directions, trying to understand where she might be headed or where she had come from. She hesitated, then pointed weakly in the opposite direction toward the distant hills. The cowboy followed her gesture with his eyes. That land was rough and difficult. Travel there was slow, and water was not always easy to find. If she had been coming from that direction, it explained a lot. It explained her tiredness. It explained the worn state of her clothing. It explained the quiet strength in her posture. She had survived something hard. The cowboy felt a deep respect for her. He thought again about leaving. He could still ride away and return to his usual life, but now, knowing even a small part of her struggle, that choice felt heavier. Walking away from someone in clear need did not sit well with him. He took a deep breath and slowly dismounted from his horse. He made sure to land softly, keeping his movements slow and open. He stood beside his horse, one hand resting gently on the saddle, showing that he was not reaching for anything dangerous. This was a big step. Being on foot made him more equal in her eyes. It showed that he was not trying to use his position or strength to control the situation. He wanted her to see him as a man, not just a rider passing through. The woman watched carefully, but she did not step back. That small detail meant a lot. The cowboy looked around the area and then back at her. He gently pointed to his horse and then made a motion as if offering a ride, but he did it carefully, not too directly. He did not want to pressure her. He only wanted to show that there might be a safer option than staying alone by the river after dark. She did not answer right away. Her eyes moved between him, the horse, and the river. Inside her, a difficult choice was being made. Trusting a stranger could bring safety, but it could also bring danger. Staying alone could mean facing the night with no protection. The cowboy waited. He did not rush her. He knew that real trust took time, especially after loss and fear. He stood quietly, letting the moment stretch, letting her feel that the choice was hers. The river continued to flow, carrying away the last warmth of the day. The torn fabric of her clothing, the tired look in her eyes, and the quiet strength in her posture all told the same story. She was not just a woman washing clothes. She was someone who had been through something that changed her life. The cowboy did not yet know her full story. But he knew one thing clearly. This meeting was no longer just an accident. It was the beginning of something that would test his courage, his kindness, and his understanding of a world much bigger than his own small routine. The woman stood very still, her eyes moving slowly between the cowboy and his horse. The choice in front of her was not simple. Trust was something she had learned to give carefully, because in her past, giving trust too quickly had brought pain. The cowboy could see that in her face. It was the look of someone who had been forced to grow strong because weakness was not safe. He did not speak. He knew that sometimes silence was better than words. The wind moved gently through the trees near the river. Leaves rustled softly, and a bird called from somewhere far away. These small sounds filled the space between them, giving the moment a strange calm, even though both of them felt the weight of the decision. Slowly, the woman lowered her shoulders a little. It was a small sign, but to the cowboy, it meant that her fear was not in full control anymore. She took one careful step toward the horse, then stopped. She looked at the animal closely, watching how it stood quietly, its head low and its body relaxed. The cowboy gently placed his hand on the horse's neck and spoke softly to it. "It's all right, girl," he said in a calm voice. The horse did not move. It simply flicked its ears and remained still. The woman seemed to take comfort in that. Animals, she knew, could often sense danger before people did. If the horse was calm, maybe the man was not a threat. She took another small step forward. The cowboy stayed where he was, giving her full control of the distance between them. He wanted her to feel that she was not being pushed into anything. His hands were open and relaxed at his sides. She reached out slowly and touched the horse's side with her fingertips. The animal did not react badly. That small moment seemed to ease something inside her. Her breathing became a little steadier. The cowboy watched quietly. This was not just about getting on a horse. It was about letting someone close again, even in a small way. He understood that, even if he did not know her full story.
She looked up at him, meeting his eyes. For a moment, something passed between them that did not need words.
It was not trust yet, not fully, but it was the beginning of understanding. The cowboy gave a small nod, as if to say, "You are safe for now." He slowly moved to the other side of the horse and gently adjusted the blanket and saddle, making sure everything was secure. He wanted to make it easier for her if she chose to ride. His movements were careful and slow, giving her time to change her mind if she needed to. The light was fading quickly now. The sky had turned from soft gold to deeper shades of orange and purple. The river reflected those colors, making the water look like it was carrying pieces of the sunset away. Night was coming. The woman glanced toward the darkening hills and then back at the cowboy. The fear in her eyes was still there, but it was now mixed with something else. Hope, maybe, or simple need. Being alone at night was not a good choice. She took a deep breath. Then, with quiet strength, she nodded once. It was a small movement, but it meant everything. The cowboy felt a sense of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This was no longer just a passing moment. By accepting his help, she was placing part of her safety in his hands. He took that seriously. He moved slowly to the horse's side and held the reins firmly but gently. He then stepped slightly away, giving her space to approach. She moved closer, carefully, as if still ready to step back if something felt wrong. The cowboy showed her, using slow motions, how she could hold the saddle to help herself up. He did not touch her. He only demonstrated from a short distance, respecting her space. She watched closely. Then she tried. Her movements were careful and controlled. She was clearly tired, but she was strong. With effort, she managed to lift herself up and sit on the saddle. The horse shifted its weight slightly, but remained calm. The cowboy felt a quiet sense of relief. He stepped back to give her room to settle. She adjusted her position, holding the saddle horn lightly. Her posture was stiff at first, but she slowly found her balance. She looked down at him, her face serious. The cowboy gave her a reassuring nod. "It's okay," he said softly. "We'll go slow." He did not know if she understood the words, but his tone carried the meaning. He then mounted the horse carefully behind her, keeping a respectful distance. He did not want to crowd her or make her uncomfortable. He held the reins loosely, guiding the horse gently away from the riverbank. The horse began to walk at a slow, steady pace. They moved along the trail, the sound of hooves soft against the dirt. The river slowly faded behind them, replaced by the quiet sounds of the land at dusk. The woman sat very still, her body tense but controlled. The cowboy could feel that she was alert, listening to every sound, watching every shadow. He did not blame her. After what she had likely been through, being careful was the only way to survive. As they rode, the cowboy pointed out a small rise in the land ahead, using gestures to show that there was higher ground and more open space there. He wanted to take her somewhere safer, where they could see what was around them, and where wild animals would be easier to notice. She followed his gesture and nodded slightly. The ride was quiet. The sky continued to darken, and stars began to appear. One by one, the first cool air of night brushed against their faces. The land felt bigger and more uncertain in the growing darkness. The cowboy's thoughts were heavy. He wondered where her people were. He wondered what had separated her from them. He wondered how much pain she was carrying inside, hidden behind her calm, strong face. He wanted to ask, but he knew it was not the right time. Sometimes people needed to feel safe before they could share their story. After a short while, they reached a small open area near a group of trees. It was a place the cowboy knew well. It was not a full camp, but it was a spot he had used before to rest during long rides. There was some shelter from the wind, and the ground was mostly clear. He guided the horse to a stop. He dismounted first, moving carefully so he would not startle her. Then he stepped back and showed her how she could get down safely. She followed his movements, slowly lowering herself from the saddle. Her legs were a little unsteady when she touched the ground, but she stayed on her feet. The cowboy watched closely, ready to help if she stumbled, but she managed on her own. That small moment told him a lot about her. She was not helpless. She was someone who had learned to survive. He removed his hat again and gave a small, respectful nod, a quiet way of saying that she was welcome here, at least for now. The woman looked around the small clearing, taking in the trees, the open ground, and the quiet. It was not much, but it was safer than being alone by the river. For the first time since they had met, her shoulders relaxed just a little. The cowboy felt a small sense of relief. They were not safe from everything, but they were safer than before. This was only the beginning. He did not yet know how deep her story went, or how much this meeting would change both of their lives. But as the stars grew brighter and the night settled in, he understood one thing clearly. This careful first journey together had turned two strangers into something closer to allies, and that small step would lead to much bigger changes than either of them could imagine. The night air settled quietly around the small clearing. The sounds of the river were now far away, replaced by the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of night birds. The cowboy moved calmly, showing that he had done this many times before. He did not rush. Every movement was slow and careful, meant to keep the space peaceful and safe. He gathered a few small pieces of dry wood from the ground and nearby bushes. He made a small fire, not too big, just enough to give warmth and light. The flames flickered gently, casting soft shadows on the trees. The light made the clearing feel a little less lonely. The woman stood near the edge of the firelight at first, watching him. She kept her distance, but she did not move away. That alone showed that she was beginning to feel a small amount of comfort. The cowboy could tell that she was still alert, still listening to every sound, but her body was no longer as tense as before. He placed his bedroll on the ground, not close to her, but not too far either. He wanted to show that they were sharing the same space, but also that he respected her need for space. He then took out a small amount of food from his saddlebag. It was simple food, dry and plain, but it was enough to take away hunger. He held some of it out in his open hand, offering it to her. She looked at the food, then at him. For a moment, she did not move. It was clear that accepting food from a stranger was not easy for her. But hunger and tiredness were strong. How? After a few seconds, she stepped forward and carefully took the food from his hand. Their fingers did not touch. That was important to both of them. She moved back a few steps and sat on a flat rock near the fire, keeping a safe distance. She ate slowly, as if she had learned to make small amounts of food last as long as possible. The cowboy sat on the ground across from her, giving her privacy and respect. The fire crackled softly between them. For a while, neither of them spoke. They simply shared the quiet. The cowboy understood that silence could be a kind of kindness. It gave her space to breathe, to think, to feel a little less hunted by the world. As the warmth of the fire reached her, he could see some of the deep tiredness in her face. Her eyes looked heavy, and her shoulders slowly lowered. The long days and nights of travel had clearly taken their toll. The cowboy gently poured some water into a small cup and placed it on a rock near her. She nodded slightly in thanks and took a few careful sips. After some time, she spoke again in her own language. This time, her voice was quieter, softer. It sounded less like warning and more like memory. The cowboy did not understand the words, but he listened closely. He did not interrupt. He did not look away. He let her speak. As she talked, her eyes sometimes drifted to the fire, sometimes to the dark trees, as if she was seeing things that were not there anymore. The tone of her voice changed. At times, it sounded heavy, with sadness. At other times, it sounded tight with pain. Even without understanding the language, the cowboy could feel that she was sharing something difficult. When she finished, the silence felt different, deeper. The cowboy took a slow breath. He did not pretend to understand her story, but he wanted her to know that she was not alone in this moment. He placed his hand over his heart again, then gently gestured in a way that showed loss, separation, and distance. He did not do it perfectly, but he tried. He wanted to show that he understood that she had lost something important. Her eyes widened slightly. She studied his gestures carefully. Then, slowly, she nodded. That small movement felt like a bridge between two worlds. She pointed toward the dark hills again, then made a motion that showed people moving, then suddenly stopping. Her hands trembled slightly as she did this. She then made a motion that showed different directions, as if people had been scattered. The cowboy's chest felt tight. He did not need full words to understand this part. Something had happened. Something sudden. Something that had separated her from her people. He lowered his head for a moment, showing respect and sorrow. He did not ask for more. He knew that forcing someone to relive painful moments was not kind. She watched him closely, as if checking to see if he truly understood the weight of what she was showing. When she saw his quiet reaction, her eyes softened. For the first time, a single tear slipped down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away as if embarrassed to show that weakness. But the cowboy had already seen it. He did not react in a big way. He simply stayed calm. Sometimes the strongest support was just being there. The fire burned lower, and the night grew colder. The cowboy added another small piece of wood to keep the flames steady. The light flickered across her face, showing lines of worry and strength mixed together. He could see now that her torn clothing was more than just a sign of rough travel. It was a sign of a life that had been broken apart suddenly. She had not had time to prepare. She had not had time to protect everything she cared about. She had survived. That alone told him how strong she truly was. The cowboy thought about the risks he was taking by helping her. He knew that helping someone in her situation could bring trouble. Others might not understand his choices. Some might even see it as dangerous. But sitting there by the fire, looking at the tired woman across from him, those worries felt small compared to what she had already faced. He made a decision in his heart. He would not abandon her. Not now. Not after seeing the truth in her eyes. He pointed toward his chest, then toward her, then made a motion of traveling together. He wanted to show her that he was willing to help her go forward, not just for one night, but until she could reach a safer place. She looked surprised. She studied his face carefully, searching for signs of lies or hidden plans. What she saw, instead, was simple honesty and concern. It took a long moment. Then she nodded. It was not a fast or easy choice for her. It was the choice of someone who had learned that survival sometimes meant accepting help, even when fear said not to. The fire continued to burn low, and the stars above seemed brighter than before. They were still strangers. They still did not fully understand each other. But something important had changed. They were no longer just two people who happened to meet by a river. They were now two people connected by shared hardship and a fragile agreement to face the next part of the journey together. As the night grew deeper, the cowboy lay back on his bedroll, not turning his back to her, but not facing her directly either. He wanted her to feel safe enough to rest. He kept his senses alert, listening for any sound of danger. The woman stayed sitting for a while longer, staring into the fire. Her face looked calmer now, even though the pain in her heart was still there. At last, she slowly lay down near the edge of the firelight, keeping a careful distance but allowing herself to rest. The flames crackled softly. The land around them was still and quiet. For the first time in a long while, the woman was not completely alone. And for the first time, the cowboy understood that this journey was no longer just about helping someone for a short time. It was becoming something much bigger, something that would test his strength, his patience, and his understanding in ways he had never expected. Morning came slowly, with soft light touching the tops of the trees before reaching the small clearing. The fire had burned down to quiet embers, and the cool air carried the fresh smell of earth and leaves. The cowboy was already awake. He had spent part of the night listening for danger, as he always did when sleeping outside. When the first birds began to sing, he knew it was time to move. He rose quietly so he would not startle the woman. She was already awake too, sitting up and watching the sky change color. There was a tiredness in her face, but also something new. There was a small sense of calm that had not been there the day before. The night had not taken her safety, and that alone felt like a small victory. The cowboy gave her a respectful nod. He stirred the embers and added a small piece of wood, bringing the fire back to life, just enough to warm the air and heat a little water. He offered her some simple food again. She accepted it with a small nod and ate quietly. They shared the morning in silence. The land felt different in daylight. What had felt dangerous and unknown at night now looked more open. The trees, the hills, and the wide sky gave a clearer picture of where they were. The cowboy could see faint trails and signs of travel in the dirt. He studied them carefully. He wanted to choose the safest path forward. He packed his bedroll and saddlebag with practiced movements. The woman watched, learning his routine, understanding that he was preparing for a longer journey, not just a short ride. He pointed toward the rising sun and then toward the distant land, showing that they would be traveling for some time. He made a gentle motion to show walking and riding, then pointed to her and to himself together. She understood. She took a slow breath and nodded. This was not just a ride to the next bend in the river. This was a decision to move forward together. They prepared to leave the clearing. The cowboy checked his horse carefully, making sure it was rested and ready. He helped the woman mount again in the same respectful, careful way as before. He made sure she was steady and comfortable before getting on himself. They started down the trail at a slow pace. The morning light made everything feel new, but the past was still heavy in both their hearts. The cowboy thought about the dangers ahead. He knew that traveling with her would bring attention. Cowboy Captain Reed's head. Abad. He knew that some people would not understand his choice, but he also knew that doing what was right was not always easy. As they rode, the woman began to point out small signs in the land. She showed him broken branches, disturbed dirt, and faint tracks that he might have missed. It became clear that she had strong knowledge of the land. Even after everything she had been through, she was still aware, still careful, still skilled. The cowboy felt respect grow inside him. She was not just someone in need. She was a survivor. They stopped near a small stream later in the morning to let the horse drink and to rest for a short time. The woman knelt near the water and washed her hands and face. The cowboy stood a little distance away, keeping watch. He could not stop thinking about her people. He wondered how far away they might be. He wondered if they were safe. He wondered if they were searching for her, too. He wanted to help her find them. Using simple gestures and careful words, he tried to ask about the direction of her tribe. He pointed in different directions, then pointed to her, then made a motion of many people together. She watched and thought. Then she pointed toward the far hills again, farther than before. She made a motion to show that it was a long distance. She then placed her hand over her heart and closed her eyes for a moment. The cowboy understood. The journey would not be easy, but it was not impossible. He nodded slowly, showing that he accepted the challenge. They continued on. As the day passed, they faced small difficulties. The trail became rough in places. The land grew more open and exposed. The sun became stronger, and they had to stop more often to rest and drink water. Through it all, the woman stayed strong. She did not complain. She did not show fear in big ways. But the cowboy could see the quiet effort it took for her to keep going. At one point, they came across signs that made the cowboys slow down. Tracks in the dirt showed that others had passed through not long before. He studied them carefully, trying to understand who they belonged to and how old they were. He became more alert. The woman noticed his change in posture and followed his gaze. Her face grew serious. She clearly understood that not all people they might meet would be safe. The cowboy gently guided the horse off the main trail for a short distance, choosing a path that was harder to see. He wanted to avoid trouble if possible. She nodded in understanding. This small teamwork showed how much their connection had already grown. They were learning to trust each other in quiet ways. Later in the afternoon, they reached higher ground. From there, they could see a wide stretch of land below. The hills, valleys, and distant trees formed a big, open view. The cowboy stopped the horse so they could both look. The woman stared at the land for a long time, her eyes filled with emotion. This view seemed to remind her of home. She pointed toward a far ridge, barely visible in the distance. Her hand trembled slightly as she did. The cowboy followed her gesture. "That way," he said softly, "even if she might not fully understand." He nodded with certainty. She looked at him. For the first time since they had met, she allowed a small, real smile to appear. It was not big. It was quiet, but it was full of meaning. It was the smile of someone who could finally see a path forward. The cowboy felt something change inside him. This was no longer just about helping for a day or two. This was about making sure she reached safety. This was about doing what was right, even if it took time, effort, and courage. They continued riding as the sun moved lower in the sky. They were still far from their goal. There were still dangers ahead. There were still many unknowns, but they were no longer facing them alone. Two strangers had become traveling partners. Two separate lives had crossed and joined for a purpose neither had planned. As the light of the day began to fade again, the cowboy knew they would need to find another place to rest for the night. But this time, it felt different. This time, there was a plan. This time, there was direction. This time, there was hope. The meeting by the river, the torn clothing, the silent pain, and the careful trust had all led to this moment, a journey forward. Not just across the land, but toward healing, safety, and a future that had once seemed impossible. And as they rode on together, both of them knew that no matter what challenges waited ahead, this choice to help, to trust, and to keep moving forward had already changed their lives forever.